Here's where we are in the governance series. Phase 1, seeing the system, letters 1 to 12, complete. We are in Phase 2, designing the system, letters 13 to 30. We completed Stage 1, entering, design, letters 13A and 13B. We completed Stage 2, stabilizing the core, letters 14 to 17. We are in Stage 3, seeing clearly, letters 18 to 20. We just completed letter 19A when the information arrives and no one can act on it. We are now in letter 19B, when decision makers lack the domain knowledge the decision requires. Letter 19A addressed the interpretive gap. What happens when the people who need to act on a signal have never been placed close enough to its source to understand what it is telling them? Signal translation design closes that gap by deliberately designing the conditions under which the signal can be received. Letter 19B addresses a different dimension of the same territory. Sometimes the gap is not in proximity. The people responsible for interpreting a signal have access to the information. They have been present in the conversations. They have read the reports, and they still cannot read what the signal means because the domain knowledge required to interpret it accurately is not present in the room where the decision is made. This is a different condition, and it requires a different design response. One of the leading technology companies in the enterprise networking space offers a top-tier professional certification, among the most rigorous in the industry. The pass rate is low. The technical depth required is substantial. The credential is recognized globally as a mark of advanced capability. I was asked to develop a preparation course designed to increase candidates' likelihood of passing. Before I wrote a single learning objective, my manager made the specification clear. This is to be an advanced class. This is the company's highest certification. The course must reflect that level. The instruction was precise. The logic behind it was sound. A preparation course for the most advanced certification in the portfolio should operate at an advanced level. That is what the brand required. Before designing anything, I contacted all the proctors, the people who administer the advanced certification examination and observe candidates across thousands of testing sessions. I asked each of them the same question. In your experience, what content should this preparation course emphasize to give candidates the strongest foundation for passing? The answer came back consistently across all proctors. Emphasize the basics. Candidates were arriving at the examination with sophisticated theoretical understanding of complex configurations and gaps in the foundational knowledge those configurations required. No amount of advanced preparation would close a gap that existed at the foundation. The question asked of the proctors was a design question, not a diagnostic one. The distinction is worth holding. A design question asks what the structure needs to contain in order to produce the outcome it is designed to produce. A diagnostic question asks what is failing and why. These are not the same inquiry, and they do not produce the same quality of answer. When an organization approaches a challenge by asking what is failing, it orients itself toward the condition. When it asks what the design needs to contain, it orients itself toward what becomes possible. The proctor's answer happened to reveal a failure cause, but that was their answer, not the shape of the question. The question was always about design. Organizations that learn to ask design questions before diagnostic ones do not stop seeing what is failing. They see it earlier, from a position that already points toward what can be built. I now had two signals pointing in opposite directions. My manager's instruction said, advanced class. The proctors, the people with the most direct proximity to the actual failure, said, the basics are missing. The organization had no design mechanism for those two signals to meet before the course was built. Here's how I resolved it. I taught the basics. I taught them thoroughly and without apology. And I framed every element as an advanced exercise, not as remediation, not as review, but as the foundational precision that separates candidates who pass from candidates who do not. At the end of each exercise, I set a completion standard. I worked through the exercise myself, finished first, and said, I'm done. If you want to pass this examination, you should be done by now. The room understood what that meant. Several students rescheduled their examinations after the course. not because the course had failed them, because the course had given them, for the first time, an accurate picture of where they stood relative to what the examination actually required. They had come in believing they were ready. The exercise, the standard it set, the pace it required, made the gap between where they were and where they needed to be visible in a way no prior preparation had. The students who rescheduled were not giving up. They were self-governing. They had received accurate information and acted on it. The governance observation in this story is not about the students, it is about the specification. My manager understood the brand requirement of the advanced certification. She did not have the domain proximity to know what the proctors knew, that the failure cause was foundational, not advanced. The specification she gave me was accurate within her domain. It was incomplete within the domain of the people she was trying to serve. The organization had no mechanism that required the domain knowledge of the proctors to be present in the room where the course was specified. The specification was made at the level of what the people closest to the decision already knew, and what they already knew was not sufficient to read what the examination results were actually showing. Let us look at a similar scenario from a different angle. In 1999, Dr. Ron Uhlig brought an idea to a small team. Dr. Uhlig held a physics doctorate from the University of Maryland and a BS in physics from MIT. During the years when the foundational protocols of the internet were being developed, he had worked at the Pentagon alongside the engineers who built those protocols, including Vinton Cerf and Robert Kahn, both considered fathers of the internet. He understood from the inside what networked infrastructure made possible and where it was heading. His idea was a tablet device, unlike anything available at the time, not the business-specific tablet Microsoft was beginning to pursue. A thin, portable device designed for reading newspapers, magazines, books, and for writing directly on the screen with a stylus. A personal device, a consumer device, something you would carry the way you carry a book. The technical specification was fully considered. A ribbon-thin battery capable of an 8-hour charge, a 12.1-inch screen significantly larger than anything available in the consumer market at that time, wireless connectivity, 64 megabytes SD-RAM, 128 megabytes flash memory, touchscreen capability with stylus input, microphone input, MP3 and WAV recording, and enough storage and memory to be genuinely useful for schools, businesses, and personal use. Not a device you would carry alongside a desktop computer, a device that made carrying one unnecessary. There were 4 principals working on this initiative. One member of our team had been involved in 18 different startups and brought substantial experience in business plan development and investor presentation. The investment environment at the time was not receptive. The dot-com bubble had collapsed. Investors who had extended significant capital to startups run by people without the organizational discipline to deliver on what they promised had lost considerably. The confidence required to fund an unbuilt device based on a demonstrated vision was not available. Not because the project lacked merit, but because the governance failures of other organizations had closed the investment environment for a large majority of people in it. Despite those conditions, the team secured funding through an investor colleague of Dr. Uhlig's to build a prototype that could be turned on. In October 2001, the team traveled to New York at their own expense. They carried a wooden prototype because the resources to build a working model at that stage were not yet available, and presented to executives at a leading publishing company. The position was straightforward. People would begin reading newspapers, magazines, and books from this device. They would write on the screen. Content consumption would move from physical media to a portable digital device of this kind. The executive said, "People will not read books from a computer. Computers are used for business, not personal use." In 2010, Apple introduced the iPad, a color touchscreen tablet with writing capability, wireless connectivity, and consumer-grade content consumption design. Exactly what our team had presented, exactly how we had described it, 9 years after our meeting with the publishing company. The governance lesson this story carries is not that the publishing executives made a poor decision. They were not wrong about computers as they understood them in 2001. They were interpreting a future signal through the lens of a present reality. And the present reality they understood was publishing, not networked consumer technology. Dr. Uhlig had helped build the infrastructure that made the device possible. He understood what a network device in a consumer's hand could become because he had been inside the architecture that created that possibility. The signal he was reading was not speculative to him. It was the next logical step from work he had already helped build. The executives understood publishing. Those are two different domains, and the governance design in that room had no mechanism that required the technology assessment to be conducted at the level of domain knowledge the signal required. The signal was present. The domain knowledge to read it was present. The design that would have brought them together was not. These two stories carry the same governance conditions seen from two different levels of organizational life. In the advanced certification story, the specification was made at the operational level. A manager with brand knowledge and no direct proximity to the examination results. In the publishing company story, the decision was made at the strategic level, executives with deep publishing expertise and no direct proximity to the technology domain the decision required. The condition is the same at both levels. Capability gap. The people responsible for interpreting a signal and making a decision about it lack the domain knowledge required to read what the signal means. The information is present. The decision authority is present. The domain knowledge required to connect them accurately is not. The capability gap is not the same as the interpretive gap from letter 19a. In the interpretive gap, the people who need to act on a signal have never been placed close enough to its source to understand what it is telling them. Proximity is the design gap. In the capability gap, proximity may be present. The people are in the room, they have seen the reports, they have heard the presentations, and the gap is in the domain knowledge required to evaluate what they are receiving. One distinction separates them. In the interpretive gap, the person has not experienced the signal directly. In the capability gap, the person has received the signal and lacks the knowledge to read what it means. Both conditions have design responses, and both are among the more consequential governance gaps in organizations that have invested in reporting systems and decision frameworks because neither announces itself as a knowledge gap. Each presents as a judgment call made by qualified people. Oversight rules, the governance condition that allows the capability gap to persist structurally. When organizations place leaders in oversight of domains without building a designed mechanism for those leaders to develop sufficient domain knowledge to read what they are overseeing, the capability gap becomes embedded in the governance structure itself. It is not a gap that individual leaders created. It is a gap the design created by placing decision authority in roles without ensuring those roles have access to the domain knowledge the decisions require. The publishing executives were not placed in oversight of consumer technology evaluation by accident. The organization's governance design placed a publishing decision whether to invest in a reading device in the hands of publishing experts. That is not an unreasonable design. The gap was that the decision also required technology domain knowledge that the design did not ensure was present. Two design responses address these two conditions. Domain sufficiency design. Domain sufficiency design is the governance requirement that decisions be made with sufficient domain knowledge to evaluate what the decision requires. Not just the domain knowledge the decision makers already hold. 3 questions define it for any significant decision. What domain knowledge does this decision actually require? Not what domain knowledge do the decision makers hold. Is that knowledge represented in the room where the decision is made, either held by the decision makers or explicitly present through designed consultation? If the required domain knowledge is absent, what is the design mechanism for bringing it into the decision before the decision is finalized? Domain sufficiency design does not require every decision maker to be an expert in every domain their decisions touch. It requires the governance structure to identify when a decision crosses domain boundaries and to design a mechanism for the missing domain knowledge to be present before the decision is made. In the advanced certification story, domain sufficiency design would have required the proctors, the people with direct proximity to the examination results, to have a seat in the course specification conversation before the specification was finalized. Not to override the brand requirement, to ensure the brand requirement was informed by what the examination data was actually showing. In the publishing company story, domain sufficiency design would have required the technology assessment to be conducted at the level of domain knowledge the device represented, with someone who understood networked consumer technology in the room before the publishing executives rendered their judgment. Engaged oversight design. Engaged oversight design is the governance requirement that leaders placed in oversight of a domain development sufficient working knowledge of that domain to read the signals it produces, not to become technical experts, but to know enough to ask the questions that surface what the domain signals are actually showing. The distinction between oversight roles and engaged oversight design is the distinction between holding a position and understanding what the position requires. An oversight role without domain sufficiency is a position that can approve, fund, and direct, but cannot evaluate. It cannot distinguish between a signal that confirms the strategy is working and a signal that confirms the reporting system is measuring the activity the strategy requires, rather than the outcome it was designed to produce. Engaged oversight design builds domain literacy into the governance structure deliberately through structured briefings, field exposure, required consultation, and the explicit expectation that leaders in oversight roles develop the knowledge their oversight requires, not as a personal development aspiration, as a governance design requirement. In AI governance specifically, the board member or executive who oversees AI initiatives without developing sufficient domain knowledge to evaluate whether the model monitoring parameters are capturing the signals that matter rather than the signals that were easiest to configure is holding an oversight role without engaged oversight design. The position exists. The domain sufficiency that makes the position functional has not been designed. What this means for your organization. Organizations navigating AI adoption are making consequential decisions at a rate that frequently outpaces the domain knowledge available in the rooms where those decisions are made. This is not a leadership gap. It is a design gap. The absence of a mechanism that ensures the domain knowledge a decision requires is present before the decision is finalized. The following 3 questions are worth bringing into a leadership conversation, not as a diagnostic applied from the outside, but as a starting point for a conversation the organization may not yet have had the language to have. For significant decisions made in the past 12 months, were the people making those decisions in possession of the domain knowledge required to evaluate what they were deciding? Or were they making decisions at the level of expertise they already held in domains that may have required something different? When decisions cross domain boundaries, a technology decision with legal implications, a governance decision with technical requirements, a financial decision with operational consequences, is there a design mechanism for bringing the missing domain knowledge into the room before the decision is made? For leaders currently in oversight of AI initiatives, is there a design pathway for those leaders to develop sufficient working knowledge of what they are overseeing to evaluate the signals those initiatives are producing? Or is the oversight role held without the domain literacy the role requires? Organizations that find these questions easy to answer with specificity and confidence tend to have designed the domain sufficiency requirement into their governance structure deliberately. For those where the answers are less immediate, the capability gap may be operating in decisions that appear well made at the time they are finalized and become visible as something different only after the consequence has arrived. In 2001, the publishing executive said people would not read books from a computer. In 2010, Apple introduced the iPad. The gap between those 2 moments was not a technology gap. It was a domain sufficiency gap, and it was present in the room long before the iPad made it visible. Signal translation design from letter 19A ensures the signal can be received by the people who need to act on it. Domain sufficiency design and engaged oversight design. From this letter, ensure that people who receive the signal have the knowledge to read what it means. Together, these two design responses address the conditions that prevent an organization from acting on what it receives. The signal reaches the right people in a form they can receive. The right people have sufficient domain knowledge to evaluate what the signal is showing. The governance structure is designed to support both. There is a third condition that neither of these designs fully resolves. Sometimes the signal is readable. The domain knowledge is present. The decision maker understands what the signal means and what it requires. And the accountability structure ensures that the consequence of acting on that signal, the credit for a decision that proves sound, the cost of a decision that proves otherwise, belongs to someone other than the person who received it. When the consequence of a decision and the accountability for that decision are held by different people, the governance structure has a design gap that no amount of signal quality or domain knowledge can fully compensate for. Letter 19C asks, what happens when accountability and outcome belong to different people? Patterns addressed in this letter: capability gap, which resolves to domain sufficiency design; oversight roles, which resolves to engaged oversight design. Thank you.